welcome to the Dino Dean Show, and I'm your host, Dino Dean, the Dean of Blog Talk Radio. We have a very informative show lined up for today. We have on Mr. Reggie Turner, who is producer and director of the film Before They Die, which is about the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots that happened in 1921, and that area is often termed as Black Wall Street. And with that said, I'd like to welcome Mr. Reggie Turner to the Dino Dean Show. Welcome, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Dino. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience today.
Absolutely. And Mr. Turner, I just wanted to let you know on air that I viewed your documentary, I thought I was versed on Black Wall Street and what happened in Tulsa, but the documentary that you produced and directed, it really gave me a lot more insight. And the first thing I want you to do is, could you please give out a website where people can purchase the movie?
Absolutely. You can go to our site, www.beforetheyDieMovie.com. That's the name of the film. It's BeforeTheyDieMovie.com.
Yes, sir. And the first question I wanted to ask you was, pre-1921, what type of community had African Americans built in Tulsa, Oklahoma? And would you call it a blueprint for what African Americans need to do today to rebuild hoods back into communities?
Well, those are two very important points which both have some important distinctions as we try to apply them in the world we live in today. But prior to the riot, the Greenwood section of North Tulsa was the segregated community in which all black folks lived at the time. And it was highly progressive and highly insular and supportive of each other. That was probably the result of the mandated segregation and Jim Crow laws that were in effect at that time. But in that community, black folks owned their own banks, their own businesses, hotels, pool halls, bake shops, restaurants, you name it, they had it. But they also had built their own infrastructure, their own taxi service, their own bus services, their own hospitals. So they were a community unto themselves, but a very prosperous community because each business supported and fed the members of their community. The dollar circulated 36 times in that neighborhood, and that's the kind of blueprint and support that we'd be well advised to try and duplicate in our communities today, where each of us supports the others, and we gain the benefit of our economic dollar turning over and causing each business to feed each business, to feed each person in our community. It would be a very, very significant day if we were able to incorporate many of those lessons that we should have learned from the Greenwood community of 1920-21.
Absolutely, sir. Let me ask you this question. Who is Dick Rowland?
Dick Rowland, who we refer to in the film as Diamond Dick, which was a nickname that was attributed to him by the newspaper. It certainly was not a reflection of either his profession or his wealth. He probably had never seen a diamond in his life. But Dick Rowland was a young shoeshine boy who performed his services in the black-only, or as it was referred to at that time, the colored-only restroom in one of the major office buildings downtown. Dick Rowland became the excuse, or an incident involving Dick Rowland and a white elevator operator became the excuse that was used to trigger the worst case of domestic terrorism that this country's ever seen.
Yes, sir. And I wanted to also state something. I learned this from your documentary. The Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots was the largest displacement of blacks until Hurricane Katrina. And I'm glad that you put that in your documentary just so people can know just the gravity of the situation. And this wasn't a natural disaster. This was some brutal people that had a really backward mindset that really displaced a lot of people and took over a whole lot of wealth.
Well, this was a community that was approximately 10,000 black folks in population lived in the Greenwood, North Tulsa community. And you're right. We pointed out that in 16 hours, it went from being 10,000 to less than 1,000. And many of those that were still there amongst that 1,000 were trapped and interned in the convention center and the ballpark. They were held as hostages. They were held as prisoners. But in a 16-hour period, we went from the most successful African-American community to ever exist in this country to total Armageddon. The entire community, its infrastructure, its, more importantly, even its spirit was completely broken due to the deliberate actions of the majority community at the time, the white community, attacking this black community without provocation, without reason, and certainly with many, many undisclosed, secretive matters on their mind. They had goals. They had a mission that they were on to accomplish, and it was to extinguish the spirit of this community and to gain the economic value that existed in this community that they had built so seriously over the years that they had occupied.
Yes, sir, Mr. Turner. And I'm just going over my notes, and I'm going to use the word allegedly. There were allegedly 300 people killed. Would you say that that number is more than likely a lot higher, or is that number on point?
Well, that number is both accurate in the sense that we have documentation for that number of 300, and that's important because for many, many, many years and decades, when it was discussed, it was rumored that the death toll was somewhere in the area of 13, or maybe I think I read one place where they said it might have been as high as 39, and the media, in their efforts to extinguish the story or to downplay the event, continued for several decades until the 90s, in fact, kept reporting that it was less than 30 people were killed. The other side of that is, again, we went from a community of 10,000 people to overnight a community of less than 1,000. And over the next 5-7 years, that population never grew again to more than 5,000 in that same period of time. We have no idea how many people left there running for their lives and never stopped running, ending up in other parts of the country and in some cases other parts of the world. But we also have so many eyewitness accounts of just truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of bodies being dumped in the Arkansas River, being dumped in vacant mine shafts, being driven out and put in hog and pig bins where the bodies were devoured. We have bodies that were being taken to the city incineration unit and bodies being thrown in and being burned, all as a way of camouflaging the mayhem, the murder that took place. So by all of us who have studied the Tulsa race riot, we are far convinced that the number of 300 is barely representative of the actual loss and injuries that this community suffered.
Yes, sir. How many survivors are alive today, Mr. Turner?
When we started this case in 1993, our first day in court was February 13th, 2003. We actually filed the case late in 2002. At that time, we had 151 survivors who were plaintiffs in our case. As we talk today, I have 46 still living.
46 still living.
Yes.
And I think an important thing that the listeners need to realize, and it's pretty self-evident, but the survivors today, they are elderly people, but at the time they were children. And that has to be something extremely traumatic for a child to go through, to watch their homes burn down and their neighbors and family members killed. Has anybody offered any of the survivors any type of counseling to help them cope with what they went through as children?
No, not at all. And your point is very well taken and very significant for the audience to grasp. One of the major goals of the Tulsa Project, which is the nonprofit organization of which I'm the executive director, whose goal and mission is to find, to raise, and generate compensation for the living survivors. That's our first goal. But goal number 1A is to educate the world about this atrocity and to make sure that it is taught in our educational system, because as of today, it's still not taught in the vast majority of schools in this country, and it's not even taught in the state of Oklahoma. But when I speak to school students of all ages, I always make the point for them to be able to grasp the impact of this, that yes, they were all children when this happened. Our oldest living survivor is Otis Clark, and Otis is 107. But he was the eldest at the time. Obviously, he was 18. But the rest of them were 2, 3, 4, 5 years of age. And the impact, the trauma of this horrific experience has never been lost on any of them. Those who were old enough to have any recognition, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, still speak graphically about what they saw, what they experienced. And as I point out to young people, I ask them in the school setting, imagine what would happen if you left school today and went home to your address, and your home was not there. What if you went and not only was your home gone, but your neighbors were gone? The block was gone. All the neighborhood was gone. No one who you knew was where you knew them to be. Nothing that you knew or were comfortable with, your church, your school, your parents' business, your friends' homes, all of that was blown away. What would be the impact on you? What would you think about? And it has a tremendous impact on young people when they visualize themselves in that same experience, recognizing that the entire underpinnings, the entire foundation that they had been given by their family, by their parents, to be pulled away from them, and they would be left orphaned and completely disillusioned. And it has to be even more of an impact recognizing that this was done with the participation of your government. One of the great lines of the film is from Dr. Olivia Hooker, who points out poignantly, looking out the window of her home and seeing a machine gun firing at her home with the American flag on top of it. And she says, it never dawned on me that my country, 'tis of thee, would be shooting at me. And she was 6. So she has vivid recall of the entire experience. It's very tragic and very important to recognize that these elderly people in our community who we're looking to assist have carried this burden for 90 years.
Absolutely. Mr. Turner, what role did the National Guard of Oklahoma play in the riots?
Well, the National Guard was requested by the mayor, who actually by our research shows participated in this entire event. But at one point, he contacted the governor's office and asked for the help of the National Guard to control the crowd. When they arrived, the first thing they did was they sat down and had breakfast and allowed the rioting to continue while they had their breakfast meal. And
so the National Guard didn't go right into action. They sat down and they couldn't have eaten before they got there. That just sounds incredible to me.
Well, it's incredible not only in action, but even more so in impact, because when they arrived, had they dispatched immediately and set about the business of calming the riot, of stepping in and disarming the whites who were illegally deputized and marauding the streets and randomly shooting and killing people and randomly looting and burning down homes, there could have been a significant amount of life and property saved. Instead, they decamped and sat down and had breakfast and then plotted and strategized. They were on the ground for several hours before they actually went into the community. And when they did, many, many members of them, instead of disarming the whites who were marauding, they disarmed the blacks so that they could no longer protect themselves, and in many instances, they joined the rioters and began shooting at black folks themselves. They were participants.
Yes, sir. I have another name for you, Mr. Turner. Who was A.C. Jackson?
Dr. A.C. Jackson was a physician, surgeon in Tulsa, and was building a national reputation as one of the finest physicians in the country. We are all today familiar with the name the Mayo Clinic, and is probably considered, if not the premier medical facility in the country, certainly one of the finest anywhere in the world. The founders of the Mayo Clinics were also classmates and colleagues of Dr. A.C. Jackson, and they referred to him as the finest physician and surgeon that they had ever met. Dr. Jackson, who was also involved in research, scientific research, and this is the kind of things that we tell people, that the impact of what we lost, the impact that we lost as black folks is certainly significant, and we'll go in deeper into the overriding impact of that. But we can't lose sight of the fact of what this country lost at the same time. A man of Dr. Jackson's skills and mental abilities might have been a physician whose work and research cured polio, cured cancer. He was of that level of a physician and scientist. And Dr. Jackson, when the riot broke out, walked from his home, was walking out of his front door with his hands raised and surrendering. His goal, we're told by his family, was take me into custody, at least if he was down in the convention center or in the ball field where folks had been taken, he might be able to treat people and do some good. So he surrendered with his hands up, and as he approached the gate of his front yard to go with the marauders, one of them turned and shot him. They took his body to the convention center, and he laid on a flatbed truck outside the convention center because there were no doctors there to help him. They didn't take him to a hospital or to even a white physician or someone to treat him. And here was this great doctor who laid on the back of this flatbed truck and bled to death.
Unbelievable. Mr. Turner, we're going to go to the call line, area code 312-343. Talk to me, it's Dino Dean. Did you have a comment or a question for Mr. Turner?
Yes, I'd like to know where he got his information from.
My information, it comes, first and foremost, it comes from the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, which was formed in 1999 through an act of the Oklahoma legislature. The commission had 14 noted historians who worked on the commission and did their research for 2 years and published a report, which was then certified and accepted by the Oklahoma State Legislature. So my research starts with the Oklahoma Riot Commission report, which they say they researched over 20,000 documents. We then spent a year and a half in pre-production where we read the materials that exist at the Oklahoma Historical Society, the University of Tulsa Oklahoma Library, and the University of Oklahoma, Oklahoma City Library.
Okay,
did you have anything else for Mr. Turner, caller?
Yes, I do. I read something about that doctor, and from what I understand, it was documented. He came out with a rifle and told him to stay away from his property. And so then they started shooting at him.
Okay, let me say this.
Yeah.
I am certain of two things. You weren't there, and I wasn't there. And I can certainly tell you this, that this is the absolute first time anyone, anywhere, including testimony before Congress and in the Oklahoma Commission report, that anyone has ever suggested that Dr. A.C. Jackson did anything other than walk from his home with his hands up and surrendering.
And also, I'd like to say this to the caller, even if that is the case, that gentleman did have a right to protect his property. It's not been documented that's what he did. Even if he did do that, he definitely had the right to protect his family and protect his property. Another question for you, Mr. Turner. Would you call this a story of denying people transfer of wealth?
Well, certainly one of the great impacts, the negative impacts of the riot is that historically throughout our existence here, each generation has benefited by the success of the previous generation. And if you think what was happening in this country in the 20s, the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, all of them were building their empires, and they passed on all of their wealth, all of their industry, all of their knowledge from one generation to the next. In that community, we had more black millionaires in the North Tulsa section collectively than there were throughout the rest of the country. But not just that they had the wealth, but the business information that they had, the businesses that they were starting, the operations that they were creating, the mindset of how to be successful. We lost all of that information along with that wealth that was not to be transferred on to future generations. So it's unfathomable what we as a society, let alone as a people, but what we as a society lost by not passing that down from generations to generation.
Absolutely, Mr. Turner. I'd like you to share a little tidbit with our listeners that they may not be aware of. The 80s and 70s group, the Gap Band. Could you tell them where they tell us where they derived their name from?
Well, the Gap Band is from Tulsa, and while there was a great disconnection between black folks in Tulsa in terms of passing on the information of the riot, so many of the survivors and their families have talked about how the victims did not share the stories, the horrors of the riot, because they didn't want to continue to perpetuate the fear of the white community's wrath upon them, nor did they want to run the risk of having it happen again. But the Gap Band were three brothers who grew up in Tulsa, and the name Gap reflects the three major cross sections and intersections in that community. That would be Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. And I submit that it's also not simply an accident that their first and probably their biggest hit was "You Dropped a Bomb on Me."
Absolutely. And with you saying that, sir, explain exactly what happened with the bombs being dropped on the community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, commonly referred to as Black Wall Street. What type of weaponry was used, and exactly who used it?
Well, what the reports have shown us is that during the time, what people also need to understand is that Tulsa was the oil capital of the world. And in the oil business, nitroglycerin and dynamite are staples of the work that they do to create wells in the search of oil, or to create drilling sites to process the oil. When the riot broke out, later in the next day, we're told that planes, private airplanes, there were no commercial airplanes, and the commission report documents that all of the private-owned planes were at the time, and the military planes, and they've been able to produce the records which show that planes from Sinclair Oil, which was the largest oil company in town, as well as the plane that was owned by the Tulsa Police Department, were the only planes capable of flying and who had pilots on the ground at the time. All the reports show that fire bombs, not bombs that were used in World War I, in terms of military-issue bombs, but fire bombs were made and dropped on buildings. And if you look at the photographs of the damage, you see brick buildings that are completely blown away. The damage is clear that it was not the type of damage that could have been inflicted from fire and burning. They blew up these buildings. Many of the buildings that were blown up were buildings that also contained records, deeds, documents, insurance, banking records. All of that was blown away so there would not be the records for follow-up and rebuilding.
Mr. Turner, once again, I would like you to please give the name of your website so our listeners and everybody in the chat room can hear what your website is so they can purchase this documentary. I found it just absolutely astounding, and I thought it was a great piece of cinema that you created.
Thank you again. The website is beforetheyDieMovie.com. And I want you to go to the website, certainly to buy the film, but at the website we have many viral films that you can watch to see and understand what our efforts have been on behalf of the survivors. There is merchandise that you can buy, T-shirts, hats, coats, aprons, anything there in the store, where the proceeds from the sale of all these materials go to the Tulsa Fund to provide compensation and reparations to the survivors. There's a petition there to support our legislation as we're working our way through Congress to get them their day in court. We ask you to sign that. There are membership opportunities for free to join. There is also, and this is extremely important to us, for those who are educators or those who are students who want to know more about this, we have created an educational version of the film, a 30-minute version, and a study guide so that teachers can no longer use the excuse that they don't have the materials or the background to teach this in our classrooms. And we have made the 30-minute version and the study guide available for free. You go to the website, there's a section which says educational version. You log in, provide your information. You only have to sign a pledge in order to receive it and receive the materials for free. And the pledge is just that you will take one day as a teacher and teach this in your class and provide the opportunity for these students to know their history. So there's a great deal of information available at the website, and I encourage all of the listeners to go, visit the site, sign up, become a member, join our journey for justice on behalf of these people, buy products, make donations, and support our efforts on behalf of these survivors. And I encourage you to do it today as soon as possible, because these people are 90 years old to 107. We don't have much time to help them. We need to do all we can to do to make life better for them, and we need to do it before they die.
Absolutely, and I'd like to reiterate what Mr. Turner is stating. It seems to me that, like, the country and the state of Oklahoma is just waiting for these people to die off, and it become a moot point. But we have a responsibility to our elders and our ancestors to do something. Don't just stand by and be happy you have a job, be happy you're employed. This is one of the most heinous acts ever to happen on U.S. soil. And in April 19th, 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing, in which the federal building was bombed, those people were compensated for what happened. Mr. Turner, could you tell us about some of the past misjustices that have come about in which people were compensated, yet the survivors of the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots have been denied?
Well, your point is very well taken about what happened in 1995. We can also talk about what has happened on 9/11 in New York City. All of the victims have been compensated for their loss. All of, and even beyond the victims, the first responders who lost their lives trying to save lives, they and their families have been compensated, as they all should, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
The folks in Oklahoma City who've been compensated, without a doubt. There is no doubt that those people who are victimized by acts of terrorism under our judicial system are entitled to compensation, as we did with the Japanese survivors of internment from 1942, from the World War II. Those victims were compensated by an act of Congress. We even look at the Holocaust victims and survivors. They have been compensated, and in their case, even property returned to them that they were able to prove was theirs. In fact, we have documentation to show the land-owning rights of these living survivors, property that has been taken over by the city, taken over by the state, taken over by the federal government. We have survivors who owned the land upon which the federal government came in and has now built a major thoroughfare and freeway going through town, and no one received any compensation for that. The records don't even indicate where there was a transfer from the ownership to the federal government. So these people have been victimized in so many ways and have received no compensation. And I'll tell you something that particularly is distressful. As the city and state has become more aware, and our efforts to synthesize them to the need for compensating these people has grown stronger. Some of their efforts, while laudable in one sense, on the other hand, make no sense. And the best example I can give you of that is that the commission report called for some form of compensation and reparation to these people. The legislature at that time agreed to generate $5 million, which would go to the construction of a museum and memorial on behalf of the survivors. That took more than 7 years to get the funds allocated, much longer than it was anticipated doing. They've now started building this facility, but here's what makes no sense. Why would the state agree to give $5 million to other state agencies to build a facility on land that was stolen from these people that's going to benefit the tax revenues of the city and state, as opposed to simply giving the money to the survivors?
Absolutely. Mr. Turner, we're going to go to another caller. Area code 708-781. Did you have a question or a comment for Mr. Reggie Turner?
It's good to be a part of the show, and I'd like to welcome your guest. You're doing a great job by pointing out the historical significance of what happened. The only thing I'm kind of curious about is when you have economic power, which they did, why wasn't there a military force set up to protect their interests?
Well, two things. First of all, at the time, Oklahoma was new to being a state. The National Guard was called in under the guise to come in and quash the riot and to protect both the white and the black community from the mayhem that was going on. But what you have to also understand is that because of Jim Crow segregation at the time, there were in a city of over 100,000, meaning entire Tulsa community, and the black community of Greenwood, which is 10,000 of that number, there were only 2 black members of the police force. Consequently, justice was being meted out by the same people who were under the guise and support of injustice. There was no black militia. There were no black members to speak of on the police force to rally and provide protection for them. And because our military was segregated at that time, they could not even send a black unit of officers or members to come and protect them. We were an unprotected community. Now, I will say this. One of the projects we're working on now is about a little-known group of black folks known as the African Blood Brotherhood. The African Blood Brotherhood was a membership organization that black men joined, keeping their membership secretive. And their goal was to come together and protect black communities from precisely these type of actions. When the word of the riot broke out, members of the ABB were notified, and they band together, and they were jumping on trains, jumping in their wagons, cars, and doing all that they could to get to Tulsa. When it became known that there was a train load of ABB members on their way, the government shut down the railroad so that no train could get in or get out. So though black folks did have their own underground organization to try and come to their assistance, because they were the minority community and not in a position of power over things like the railroad, they could not get that assistance that they needed, and not in a timely fashion to help them defend themselves or their community.
Area code 708-781. Did you want to chime back in and ask another question to Mr. Reggie Turner?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, that's very interesting. I wasn't familiar with this particular group, but true economic power is having some type of security force to protect your interests, because it doesn't make any sense to have a bank and anybody just come in and take the money from you. And I salute what the community did in Tulsa, Oklahoma, because it has a blueprint for black people today, but also it has a lesson that we have to have something in place to protect our best interests And thank you for sharing that with me, because I didn't know if there was anyone in place to protect us. But that's good to know now.
Well, there certainly were members, black men, who had returned recently from World War I.
Mr. Turner, let me just interject for 1 second, and I think this will help the caller. Could you explain to us who Obi Man was?
Well, Obi Man was precisely one of those brothers who I was just speaking about, a World War I veteran who had fought valiantly and gallantly for his home country and returned back to Tulsa, his home community, to segregation and racism, rights that he'd been afforded, respect that he'd been given while fighting in France, he no longer enjoyed at home. He was a member of the ABB and was a brother who was very outspoken about protecting their community. When the riot broke out, he and a group of men armed themselves and began to strategically use their military training to protect the community. They aligned themselves in strategic locations on top of Standpipe Hill, which was the highest point in town, so that they had an overview of the comings and going and had a great weapon position. They placed themselves in towers so that they could have crossfire to defend themselves, and to their credit, they used their knowledge, their skills, and their limited weapons to hold off this siege. You have to understand that they were outnumbered 10 to 1. So even if the bank people had their own support people, and I'm sure they had security people in the bank, but this didn't take place during bank hours when the security guards would have been there. This took place at night, throughout the night, and early the next morning. And the security guards, I'm sure, were home with their families or running for their lives as well. But these men fought valiantly to protect their community and held off the white community for several hours, causing them to regroup, bring in reinforcements, rearm themselves, and again, to wait and utilize the support that they received when the National Guard showed up. These men fought very valiantly to protect their community, but as one of our survivors, Wes Young, points out in the film, while they didn't have the means, meaning the armaments, to protect themselves, he's actually kind of thankful and grateful that they didn't, because if they'd had more weapons, if they'd had more ammunition, the losses would have been far more significant than what they were.
Yes, sir. Mr. Turner, I'd like for you to share with us what exactly happened at the 2007 congressional hearings on the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots.
Well, H.R. House Resolution 1843, the John Hope Franklin Greenwood Reconciliation Act bill, sponsored by Representative John Conyers, the Democrat from Michigan, is the bill that we have pending in Congress right now to provide reparations, compensation for the survivors. That hearing in 2007 was as a result of our legal case having been denied certiorari by the Supreme Court, meaning they refused to hear the case. So we took the matter to Congress. This bill is what resulted. And as a hearing in 2007 before the House Judiciary Committee, we had lead counsel and a Harvard Law professor, Charles Ogletree, as our primary spokesman, but he was joined by the late great historian Dr. John Hope Franklin and Otis Clark, our oldest survivor, and Dr. Olivia Hooker on the table to testify before this subcommittee as to the validity of the creation of a statute of limitations exemption so that the survivors could have their day in court. To our surprise, we were met with great interest and great respect by the members of the House Judiciary Committee from both sides of the aisle. In fact, when I listen to things that are happening now in Congress under President Obama's administration, and I see some of the people, like Representative Pence from Indiana, who is a very conservative voice on the Republican side. Congressman Pence said at our hearings that he thought our bill was actually a bit misguided. We didn't need to just create an opportunity for these people to have their day in court. This bill really should be the same under the same guise as the bill for the reparations for the survivors of the Japanese internment. They should simply agree upon an amount of money and pay these people. And there were several members of the Republican side, on the Republican side of the aisle, who echoed that support. Unfortunately, while we have cleared the House Judiciary Committee, we are still fighting language issues to get the bill out of the House and to get it to the Senate, and that will be an even more difficult and uphill battle we're fighting. But the 2007 hearing was significant in the fact that it is the closest opportunity that we've ever had to go on record before the American public and before the American government to make the case to give these people compensation for their losses, and at the very least, give them their day in court, which they have been systematically denied since we filed this case.
Mr. Turner, I have a question about the survivors. Have any of the survivors lost hope? Are they feeling I'm sorry, I'm having a little tongue twist problem here. Are they just feeling there's no hope left for what's going on with this case?
Well, certainly some of them have, and especially those and their families who have been with us throughout the time and who have now lost that survivor member of their family. Yes, they've lost hope because there was nothing done to benefit that victim before they died. The others continue to have hope, but do they have expectations? I think their expectations have suffered as a result of two things. One, Professor Ogletree put together what we call a dream team of attorneys. The late Johnny Cochran, of course, Professor Ogletree himself, who was one of this country's finest attorneys, a number of other attorneys who were at the top of their profession in their particular area of specialization, and including Michael Hausfeld, who was lead counsel for the Jewish community in their actions to receive compensations for the Holocaust members. So the people, the family members, the surviving victims all had a great deal of hope that this dream team would in fact be able to get this country to listen to their story and to do something to resolve their plight. And once that was extinguished by the refusal of the Supreme Court, many of them certainly became disheartened and feel like their rights have been disenfranchised behind an exception to the statute of limitations rule, which we have Stephen Cohen, Representative Cohen from Tennessee, points out that the statute of limitation is not for the aggrieved, it's for the aggriever, meaning the people who have a reason to want to avoid justice, utilize a statute of limitations as a way, as a shield to facing their day in court. So yes, many of the survivors have lost hope. They've been given a reason to lose hope after we raised their hopes and expectations. It's one of the things that drives Professor Ogletree and myself to this day, is because we truly believed as lawyers that this country would give them this opportunity to tell their story and to have justice done. But I must also say that these are the most resilient people that I've ever met in my life. I had a conversation with Otis a few months ago when he turned 107, and I said an apology to him. I said, Mr. Clark, I apologize that our efforts have not produced the results that we led you to believe could happen, that we truly believed should happen. And I promise you that I will never stop this fight until we get some justice for you. And without a second of pause, he said, Reggie, I ain't going nowhere. I'm going to stay here. The Lord has brought me through all of this. The Lord has kept me here through this time, and I'm not leaving until we get justice. So you just keep doing what you're going to do, son, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be here. Without bitterness in his heart, he travels this country, travels the world. He just came back from Jamaica. He went to Africa the last 2 years, carrying his message, preaching the gospel of the Lord, and encouraging people to love each other, support each other, and to put these types of negative experiences behind. And it's not only Otis, Dr. Hooker, Wes, all of them who travel with us and spread this message continue to have the expectation that one day we will right this wrong.
Yes, sir, Mr. Turner. And I just want to kind of digress for one moment. Disenfranchised, that was my word I was just stumbling over. Everybody look that word up. We're going to go back to another caller. Area code 312-343. Did you want to chime back in?
Yeah, I read a lot of information about the riots, and it's been documented that a lot of black businessmen took advantage of the riots also by starting their businesses on fire, hoping to collect insurance. But half of them were actually caught. And then I'd like to find out what percentage of the black people that were there at the time looted and rioted themselves.
Well, let me answer your question with a question. Where did you read that information?
From documents, from full set copies of documents.
Which documents? Because, sir, I have read the entire commission report several times.
Oh, this is not a commission report. These are from people and insurance companies.
Sorry?
These are from people and insurance companies.
Well, let me tell you exactly why that statement is patently false and unbelievable from any perspective. The main reason that none of these people would have done any of the things that you speak of is because none of them were able to file claims following the riots, because the insurance policies that were written to cover the black businesses and homes had riot covenants in them. So if they lost their property as they did through the act of a riot, they would have no means by which to be compensated. So certainly these people would not have burned down their homes knowing, or burned down their businesses knowing that they had no means to collect via their insurance.
Area code 708-781. Did you want to chime back in and have a question or comment for Mr. Reggie Turner?
Yeah, you know what? I have a lot of research that I've researched African American history here in America, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the work of Marcus Garvey were two blueprints of economic power. Why do you think African Americans lack economic power when there were two successful programs in the history of America?
Well, because the history of America has changed, and it has changed radically from the time periods then. Perhaps because the laws forced us to do business together. We had, having no other option, we did business together, and we did business very well. What integration provided for us versus what segregation did to us is an ongoing debate by historians and economists to this very day. Certainly, the opportunities that we have gained by becoming integrated into American society, many of us have tremendously benefited from. But at the same time, some of the principles that we learned by doing business with each other, creating relationships and building on those relationships and counting on those relationships could have continued even in an integrated society, because when integration became the law, whites did not run to do business with blacks. Whites continued to do business with whites. And they passed on those same skills, those same relationships, those same networking opportunities within their communities. We could have and should have done the same. At the same time, learning to live together in many ways, working together in many ways. Imagine if these black businesses had been allowed to grow and thrive. When integration came, we could have potentially had our own black General Motors, our own black Trans-America Insurance Company, our own black oil companies. And through integration, what would have happened then is what has never happened in this country. We would have had black organizations, black conglomerations who were forced to hire white people. Whites would have grown up working in black companies, just as blacks have had to learn how to grow up and work within white institutions. Had we both had those same experiences of learning to work within a power structure that was run by people who did not necessarily look like us, but had to operate under the same laws, I suggest that our racial development would be far, far more advanced than where we are today.
Mr. Turner, could you please give a shout out to all of the attorneys that worked on this case for the survivors, all of our heroes and sheroes in the legal community, please? I believe these people need to be recognized.
Well, again, it all starts at the top with Professor Charles Ogletree, Michael Hausfeld, Adjoa Ayatoro, who is the national co-chairman of INCOBRA, Suzette Malveaux, Leslie Mansfield. Eric is going to kill me because I'm blanking on Eric's last name right now. But those are the names of the members who, Dennis Sweet. Oh, my God, he'll kill me. Dennis Sweet, another brother out of Mississippi, a great, great lawyer. Willie Gary. There were a number of other attorneys who contributed to our legal efforts, both as researchers. Michelle Roberts, who was selected one of the finest attorneys in the country back in 2004 and 2002, great lawyer in Washington, D.C. These were the members of our legal team. So, again, great lawyers, great legal minds came together, donated their time. The law firm of Hausfeld and Toll and Cohen were where we held our meetings in Washington. They provided great support to us in the effort to present the best case possible in our court system, and it still got us a denial at the Supreme Court.
Mr. Turner, I want to thank you for making this film. I think it is a piece of cinematography that everybody in the country needs to see. And and I've asked you several times before, but could you please give the website out again so people can go to the website, purchase the DVD, and particularly you said earlier, you talked about teachers. If there's any teachers out here listening, please take the pledge and take it upon yourselves to teach the students about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, Mr. Turner, could you please once again give the website?
It's my pleasure. It is www.beforetheyDieMovie.com. That's beforetheyDieMovie.com. We also have a presence on Facebook. There's a page for the Tulsa Race Riot Survivors. We're on MySpace, Tulsa Race Riot Survivors. We have a Twitter account so you can follow what's going on with us with our screenings around the country. For those of you in the Chicago area, we'll be back in Chicago on the 21st of August. In fact, I just spoke to my partner, and we may, in fact, be there that Thursday, the 19th, as well, for 2 dates in that area. We'll be traveling the country with our program at various colleges and schools throughout the fall season. And so there'll be many opportunities to get out and see the film. But please see the film, buy the film, share the film so that others can have the opportunity to learn this lesson, learn this information, and to share this information. We only have a chance to move forward if we can put this in our rearview mirror from a positive perspective. We're not preaching hate, and if you go to our website, there is much information. For those people who called in with erroneous information, claiming things that they had read that did not possibly ever get published or written anywhere else, you will find a vast bibliography of all the documents utilized by the Commission, all the documents used by us in making of this film. It is completely transparent. We hide nothing. We provide every opportunity. And for people to go and educate themselves, there is no reason to hide this story. There's every reason for us, if our goal is to move forward as a society, as Americans, we have to do so in the face of clear, honest recognition as to who we've been if we're going to eventually become what we aspire to be.
Yes, sir. Mr. Turner, we're going to go to another caller, area code 708408. Talk to me, Dino Dean. Did you have a question or comment for Mr. Turner?
Actually, I just tuned in. I wanted to get caught up first.
Not a problem. I appreciate you calling in, sir. And I want to give a quote that I've run across that I just found great. A true soldier does not hate what's in front of him. He loves what's behind him. And I said that for a reason. Everybody out here that can hear my voice, we have to love what's behind us. We have to love the survivors. We have to love justice. Now, if nobody decides to go to this website knowing exactly what's going on, and we just have a brief time here, and Mr. Turner can't divulge everything to us, but we know about misjustice and civil and people treating us like dogs, and we have to come together and we have to do something for these people. These survivors deserve better, and I am totally dismayed at the fact that nothing happened at the 2007 congressional hearings. It's just like they just turned their back on it. And Mr. Turner, why do you think that the congressional hearings of 2007, nothing has come about?
Well, clearly this is not America's shining moment. No one is going to look at this and come away with a sense of pride. So clearly there are those who wish to delay, to deny, and hope these people die.
Absolutely.
I believe that the issue is one of liability and blame. When we have gone to Oklahoma and held our screenings and met with members of the community, when articles are printed in the Tulsa World newspaper, we get in the comment section to those such anger and bitterness from people because of the anonymity that they can have by logging on under a screen name and spilling hatred and violence. We have so many people, an equal number, who will turn and, of course, be positive and want to be supportive of that, but those voices often get drowned out by those who speak of hate and negative perspectives. But let me say this. Hate cannot hide in the light of justice, in the light of truth. And that's all we are asking is we don't have to embellish the story. All we have to do is expose the story. And one of the great atrocities here is that we have proof, and the evidence for this is generated by the state of Oklahoma. It's not something that I've discovered or some group of black people discovered, but the state archaeologist has discovered locations where they believe that there are mass graves from victims of the survivors.
Mr. Turner, that was actually my next question. Talk to us about Oaklawn Cemetery.
Well, Oaklawn Cemetery is the oldest cemetery in Tulsa, and it had a section where at one point blacks were buried. We have an eyewitness account, and he's in the film that you recently passed, Clyde Eddy, who as a 9 or 10-year-old boy witnessed the digging of a pit, visually saw them placing bodies in old equipment, crates, piano crates, and dumping them into this pit with these bodies in it. He identified where he thought that location was, and the state archaeologists and other people in the profession came out, and they have identified these areas and say 10 foot wide, 10 feet deep. They believe it to be a mass grave, and we have asked the city and the state to exhume those bodies and give them a decent Christian burial. Those requests have gone unresponded to. The owners of Oaklawn Cemetery have not responded, and we've even had some black folks who have offered to pay the cost for the equipment to dig these bodies up. And
to excavate, absolutely.
And we've been denied permission to enter the land to exhume the bodies, even if we were able to do it in a way to not disturb other graves who aren't part of this. And the reason can only be because to dig these people up and to give them this burial would only serve to reinforce the fact of this atrocity. And let me say this. To continue to refer to this as a riot is a politically correct term, but it is a historically inaccurate term. This was not a riot. This was ethnic cleansing. This was a massacre. This was a pogrom. This type of atrocity, if we are to embrace the complete American experience, we have to admit what took place and then come together to move together forward. And it starts with taking care of these living survivors. And we're not asking for a lot of money. We could resolve this problem if we gave each of the survivors, our initial plan was to try and raise $50,000 per survivor, and that was based on a calculation of what the Japanese victims received. At this point, I'd be happy to get $5,000 for each of the survivors, which would mean that's less than $250,000. There's no reason, as we point the finger at what happened, we also have to point the fingers at ourselves. One of my great supporters, one of my law partners, has pointed out to me that had this been a Jewish atrocity and a Jewish problem, the Jewish community would have come together over a weekend and raised money and taken care of their people and still pursued the government. We have to do the same. This is not a matter of race or racial pride, although for some it can be, but it is about doing the right thing as Americans. We can come together. We may not live long enough to see the cure for cancer or sickle cell anemia or AIDS. We're going to continue to fight those battles. We're going to continue to be there for every national atrocity that takes place that's weather-related. Here is one where we have less than 50 people living, and we have an opportunity to spend a little money to do a lot of good. It will reconcile this. It will put it in its proper place in history. We'll be able to teach it. And the teachable moment that we will have to pass on to our children is that they cannot be held responsible for what they did not do. They cannot be held responsible for what they did not do about what they did not know about. But now that we know, we are responsible for what we do going forward. And that's why we ask you to join us. Join this journey for justice, this journey towards healing. Help us help them before they die.
Absolutely. Mr. Turner, we're coming to the end of the show, and once again, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on. The information that you gave was eye-popping, is very revealing and explosive, and I want to implore all of the listeners and the callers, do something. Mr. Turner just stated, now, you can't be held accountable for what you don't know, but now we do know. So let's do something to make a remedy come about, since the United States government refuses to. And Mr. Turner, I want to thank you once again for coming on the Dino Dean Show. I really, really appreciate it. And before we go off air, please, one more time, give that website.
The website, www.beforetheyDieMovie.com. You can go there. We even have a program called Answer the Call. We will recycle these old used cell phones that you have sitting in drawers around. Give them to us. We can recycle them. We have a third party who will pay for these old phones. There's over 300 million used cell phones in this country. We can recycle them. All the proceeds will go to the survivors. Your church, your school can have a collection box at no cost. We pick them up. We deliver them. No cost to anyone. Benefit to the survivors. There are a number of things that you can do. Host a screening at your church. Host a screening at your school. Host a screening at your home. Give the proceeds from those events to the survivors. It'll be the best little money you spent, because it will pay big dividends in terms of righting this wrong.
Absolutely. Mr. Turner, you've put it down. Let's step it up. Let's not be a pitiful people. Let's come together and do something for our elders, because karma is something else. If we don't do anything for our elders, there's nothing but doom for us. And I'd like to thank all of the callers that called in. I'd like to thank everybody that was in the chat room. And once again, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Reggie Turner, for calling in and sharing this story with us. And we are at the end of our hour. I'd like to thank everybody. Tune in to the Dino Dean Show next week, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we'll have another powerful show. Thank you so much, Mr. Turner.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, your audience, for listening. Please help us help them. Thank you.
Yes, sir.